The year is 1483 and King Edward IV is dying. He has two sons, Edward Jr. and Little Richard. Now Edward Jr. is only 12 at the time, so in order to take hold of the throne, he's probably going to need some help. But don't worry, their sweet Uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, is right behind him there to help. I'm sure at this point you can probably guess who ends up taking the throne. Uncle Richard gets the crown instead of little Edward Jr. I hope you're not surprised. The Princess in the Tower is the classic case of murder for the throne. But the question is, what is the end result of this tragedy? Was it really even a murder? How does this happen? Does it slip under the rug, or does the truth ever come to light? To this day, we still technically don't know what happened. This is a true historical mystery. April 9th, 1483, King Edward IV dies. Roughly a week later, news reaches Gloucester, and his brother Richard immediately rushes to York Minster. York Minster was the largest cathedral and metropolitan church in Northern Europe. He claims he has to pledge loyalty to his new king. Before King Edward's death, he pronounces Richard as Lord Protector. Lord Protector was a title that has been used in British law for head of the state. It was sometimes used to refer to holders of other temporary posts, for example, a regent acting for the absent monarch. So basically Richard was in charge, but only temporarily. Little Edward and the Duke Gloucester set out for London on April 29th. The following morning, Gloucester arrested Edward's retinue, including the boy's uncle, Anthony Woodville, second Earl Rivers, and their half-brother, Sir Richard Grey. A retinue is basically a bodyguard, somebody put in place to accompany or watch over somebody highly important. They were sent to Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire, where they were beheaded just the next day. Richard then took possession of Edward Jr. himself, which then prompted Elizabeth Woodville to take her other son, Little Richard, and her daughters into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. She must have been pretty freaked out having her husband and all her family die in such a short span of time. Richard was not afraid to set out executions. This is only the beginning of how he managed to slide his way into the throne. Aged 9 and 12, the two princes were lodged right into the Tower of London. The Tower of London was a common place for previous kings to stay in for a few days before their coronation. Both of the princes did not arrive to the tower at the same time, though. Right after the executions, Richard takes Edward Jr. and places him in the tower. Edward is under her control, so he doesn't leave without permission. Richard claims it was for his protection, but it was also looked over as placing him in the tower could be excused as Edward preparing for his coronation. So far so good for Duke of Gloucester, but not so good for the two princes. Richard finally orders that the other young prince join his brother at the tower. Although she resisted at first, Elizabeth finally bid farewell to young Richard, most likely knowing that she'll never see her son again. Initially, putting Edward and Little Richard in the tower did not raise suspicion. The two boys were very young and vulnerable, so their safety was paramount. The tower was also the starting point for their coronation process, and it was traditional for a new monarch to stay there until the ceremony. Having the two young princes locked up in the tower really gave Richard the chance to get his wheels turning, and he sure took advantage of it. Plans continued for Edward's coronation, but the date was postponed from May 4th to June 25th. Edward was put in the Tower of London on May 9th. On June 16th, he was joined by his younger brother Richard. At this point, the date of Edward's coronation was basically indefinitely postponed by their uncle Richard. On June 22nd, 3 days before Edward's coronation, a sermon was preached by Dr. Ralph Shaw, brother of the Lord Mayor of London, claiming that Duke Gloucester be the only legitimate heir of the throne after King Edward's death. On June 25th, a group of lords and knights petitioned Richard to take the throne. Both princes were subsequently declared illegitimate by Parliament. They declared the princes illegitimate on the grounds that their father, King Edward, had contracted to marry Lady Eleanor Butler before he married Elizabeth Woodville. This would have made his marriage to Elizabeth invalid. With the prince's claim to the throne discredited, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, became next in line as literally everybody else was executed after Edward's death. On July 6th, the prince's uncle was crowned King Richard III. After King Richard III was crowned, the princes in the tower slowly started to fade away from society. The last reference to the young princes is in the Great Chronicle, which on June 16th records that the children of King Edward were seen shooting arrows and playing in the garden of the Tower sundry times. Basically, all Richard had to do was swoop in and take control of these two young boys and take their place. And then he had to somehow prove that King Edward IV didn't even have a real marriage with his wife Elizabeth. With King Edward and his three brothers dead, the boys didn't have much protection at all. The traditional view is that Richard III ordered the princes to murder to eliminate any rival claimants to the throne. In 1674, during the reign of King Charles II, two small skeletons were discovered buried under the staircase in the Tower of London, believed to be the remains of the two princes. However, the identities of the skeletons were never conclusively proven. Another theory suggests that Henry VII, who defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth and became the first Tudor king, was responsible for the princes' deaths. This theory suggests that Henry VII saw the princes as potential threats to his own reign and ordered their executions. Some theories propose that one or both of the princes survived and were secretly imprisoned or taken abroad. Supporters of this theory point to various individuals who claimed to be princes later in years, such as Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck, who were used as pawns in an attempt to overthrow the Tudor dynasty. I personally believe it was all Richard the whole time. He swooped in out of nowhere after Edward's death and was one that initiated the two boys going to the Tower. He also really didn't have to go too far as to prove their father's marriage to be illegitimate. I think he obviously just really wanted the throne. The mystery surrounding the princes in the Tower has fascinated historians and writers for centuries, and various theories and speculations have emerged about what happened to them. However, despite numerous investigations and debates, the ultimate fate of the princes in the Tower remains uncertain, and the case remains one of England's most enduring historical mysteries.